A lot of people, even in small towns, have become accustomed to Googling instead of knocking on their neighbor's door when they have a question, even in a rural space where everyone's supposed to know everybody.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Rural Renewal podcast. We're glad to have you with us again, and we are excited to this week. We are going to spend a decent amount of time talking about digital media and all things internet related to small church in an interview we have with Chris Morton a little bit later on. But before we get that started, Kathleen, we wanted to talk a little bit today about, I don't know what the right word for this is, but it's kind of the nature of ministry in a rural community, in a smaller community, where you're kind of always on and always looking for opportunities. So what's one of the ways that we kind of see that happen in our lives right now?
Well, for us, we have school-aged children. So a lot of our community involvement wraps around that. I mean, we do other things, you do the fire department and stuff like that. But when we're out and about in the community, a lot of times it's at school or school events. Our kids play sports, and that has been a great opportunity for us to connect with people. And I know our church in particular likes us to keep track kind of generally of the things that we're doing. And, like one of them is volunteer hours or that kind of thing, or one is like pastoral time with someone. And I always find that's really hard to fill out, because sometimes at games or sports things, I'll end up talking with someone and I'm like, this feels kind of pastoral, but I'm at my kid's game. So this feels weird,
And it's often a person who's like not ever been to our church.
Right. But it's pastoral. And even our son had a baseball game the other day, and I got up to talk to one person, and I noticed that someone who had been at the memorial service that we had at our church on Saturday, stopped by to talk to Chris to tell him that she really appreciated, the service and that kind of thing. So this is the kind of thing. Whereas when we lived in a smallish city and served at a church, we never ran into people we knew. Maybe a handful of times, but I love that aspect of being in a smaller community, is that you really do run into people,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the few places, we still serve. One of the roles you play, I think, as a pastor in a rural place is you are the default town chaplain still, to some extent. For those, for those who don't have a connection to a church, and we live in Vermont, so that's most people. And one of the things I think that we try to do hard in those interactions is that I think our role we see as helping turn people, 1 degree or 2 degrees or 10 degrees closer to Jesus, right? If they're facing 180 degrees away from Jesus, those conversations are helping to turn them towards Jesus. And which is often like long, slow work. But it bears fruit. I mean, I think in our time here, we've been here long enough we've seen some of the fruit of that. Sometimes you don't see fruit from that. It's just part of what you do. But I think when you're kind of out and about and living life, and our life, like Kathleen said, is right now, it's often wrapped up in like kid activities. A lot of our extra time is in that space. But, there are other, in different phases of life, you're going to be, but if you're in a rural place, you're probably going to have those connections, right? Like I know the people in our community who don't have kids at home anymore. Maybe their kids have left or, have grown and they're out of the house or they have different networks in ways that they are often in the same spaces together. They tend to go to the same things and stuff like that. And so, whatever you do, I think, as much as, sometimes you just want to be out and just be a person, and not be a pastor. But that's just not, it's not that it's not an option. It is, I think there are spaces you can do that. I think it's important to find places where you don't have to feel like you're pastoring, but you also have to recognize, for the most part in your community, that's what you're called to do. And you have to kind of come to a sense of peace about the reality that you're going to be, that in people's lives, and and quite frankly, I think this is something we should encourage our church members to do as well, right? That no matter where they are bringing the gospel with them. That doesn't mean every conversation's about Jesus, but it means recognizing when the conversation has changed from how's the weather, and I get that question a lot since I'm the weather guy, but when it changes from what's the weather to something important, like, I'm worried about my kid in this way, or, I'm worried about what's happening in town in this way, or I'm, the world isn't like it used to be kind of conversation, and you have opportunities to reframe that conversation gently and not awkwardly. Try not to be awkward, but if you are, it's a small town. Lots of people are awkward in a small town towards Jesus. I think, and that really has to be, I think it's something that you have to, you need to learn to grow into and really spend time focusing on if you're going to pastor a rural community effectively.
I agree. And I don't necessarily want to say that we are missionaries, but there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of crossover with feeling like we're not just going to the church building and being a pastor there, that our whole lives are wrapped up in being a light for Jesus in our community. And so that there's some drawbacks to that. And, sometimes we have to be careful with our kids that they don't get wrapped up in that in the same way that we do. They have to go on their own faith journey in their own way. And so we have to just be a part of that. But I think that if I need a break from that, I take a step back and go somewhere else.
Yeah, you kind of have to get out of town.
Yeah. And not that that's guaranteed that I'll be able to completely, I still get texts and Facebook messages and stuff like that. But, going on vacation for you and I think getting outside is really helpful. Like when we go on vacation, we go camping a lot. And so, or we do stuff that we're out doing something outside, I think helps us. That's not for everybody. We all have our things, but trying to find a way to disconnect yourself is healthy. Maybe not all the time you want to disconnect yourself, but I think knowing that when you're in your community, that someone could, that you're available in the way that a chaplain would be, I think. So I think there's some crossover with, feeling like you're sort of a missionary, but not really, feeling like you're a chaplain, but not completely, being a pastor, all those things are kind of wrapped up in rural ministry. Yeah.
And I think those are the kinds of things, you may hear those kind of descriptions and think, this does not, if you're listening to this and you aren't currently in a rural church and you haven't been called to a rural church, you're thinking about it and you listen to that and you're like, that does not sound good at all. That's okay. You probably aren't called to rural ministry. If you hear those things and you're like, that is what tends to pull at my heart, then rural ministry is the right spot for you, right? And I think that's one of the things we've discovered about ourselves. It was one thing we grew up in rural places, so it's kind of what we knew. But it wasn't really until we probably lived in some places that weren't quite so rural and then kind of came back to a really rural setting that we kind of recognized, oh no, this really is, it really does fit who we are. And one of the things that's I think important about ministry is finding the space to fit where God has gifted you in the right way. And so there are lots of things that need to happen in a suburban or an urban area to make a church effective for the gospel in their community that are skills that we don't necessarily have, or at least certainly have in the same way that we have some of the skills that come naturally in rural settings. So that's knowing yourself, I think, is important in that regard. And yeah, and just, lean into it and expect those, things like that to go slowly in a rural place. I mean, I think we feel like missionaries in our rural community oftentimes, partially that is our location, right? Vermont is a pretty unchurched part of the world. And so we often do feel like missionaries. Most people that we interact with on a daily basis don't have much of a connection, certainly don't have a connection to a faith community, and have a pretty limited connection to kind of any kind of faith history or in their lives. That's not the case in every rural community. Some rural communities, the church is still very much at the heart of. But I think even in the places like we are, we serve a historic church. Our church has been here for 214 years old now. So our church has been here a long time. And so even though the church has never been like a vital part of Vermont life, Vermont doesn't have a long history. It has really a history of never being a place where like a high percentage of the population went to church. But the fact that we're in a church that's been around a long time kind of gives us connection to the community, and that we are, our church is part of the life of the community, even if most people don't go to it. I think that's kind of a goal for us as a church, that people see our church that they see our church as one who cares about the good of our community. I think you have to do that as a pastor in a rural community as well. You have to really root for your community to be a place where people thrive. Obviously, that mostly happens with connection to Jesus, but there are lots of other ways that the church can kind of get on board and help a community thrive as well. And, we try, I think, and I hope your church tries to do that as well. I'm sure you do. I mean, this is what church is. So, yeah. So I think, take advantage of those opportunities. For us right now, it's particularly in the spring, it's a lot of baseball and softball games. This year's I've gotten to do more of that, of actually communicating with people. I've done a lot of coaching, especially of baseball in the last few years, of younger baseball. Daniel has aged to the point where he's kind of aged past my ability to coach well. Which is fine. And thankfully I wasn't needed this year, which was great. But that's been more conversations, but sometimes being there and being in a volunteer role there, I think, can help too. I think that you don't get as much interaction that way, but people kind of see, this is, that this is part of, when you're the pastor, they see that you as an extension of the church. This is the way the church is interacting with its community, that they care about, making sure that there's enough people so that the kids can have the activities they want to have. So yeah, all that kind of stuff I think is helpful and important, and part of what kind of helps the church be a place where people find connection to Jesus, and where when those moments arise in people's lives, they see the church community that's there as a space where maybe they can connect to a God who the church is trying to tell them loves them and cares about them, and a Savior who was willing to die for them. So yeah. What we have an interview today, Kathleen. Who did we talk to in the interview, and what did we talk about?
So this is an interview with Chris Morton. He was the director for strategic initiatives for Fresh Expressions. He's since moved on to another position, but he had some really, really helpful advice for rural churches in helping churches to just helping them with their online presence. Like, he's just showing or helping us with practical low effort strategies for small and rural churches to improve their digital presence and outreach. And sometimes I see these really big churches doing all these amazing things. But we don't have the capacity. And I'm guessing a lot of rural churches don't have the capacity to do that. But there are some easy, low-hanging fruit that we can utilize in reaching our community.
Yeah, I think it was a really good conversation that helped us think about how we can do the little things, what we're actually able to do, and ways to make, I don't want to say minimal effort, but, limited effort, or the effort that you probably have, the space you have between yourself and your congregation to do something and that will help make sure that your church is visible in a digital kind of way. I think in the interview we mentioned, nobody, even in a rural place, people don't ask people where they go to church. I mean, they may, but mostly they're going to Google. And so how do you make sure that when they Google, they can at least find you? And so Chris is really good about just sharing a little bit about how that can matter. I did when we talked about having a little bit of a social media strategy. This is maybe the intermediate level of the interview, if you've gotten past just having a website or something like that. And he talked about the goal is not to go viral. It's about making sure that there are signs of life when people find you online, which I think is a really important thing. I often say, and I say this is maybe a thing that's true about New England churches, but the internet basically came about in the or mid 90s, the beginning of it, and churches started having websites in the late 90s. And somehow, even though the internet did not exist in 1950, we built websites that looked like they were built in 1950. I don't think that's necessarily true anymore, even of rural churches. But anyways, I felt like that was true. If you remember old church websites from the late 90s, it was, I don't know, rural churches in particular. It was just somehow we built anyways. So that's always we got to do better than that. And I think we can do better than that. And Chris is going to give some good advice about that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we have to be true to ourselves as well.
Yes.
We don't, because I've been to church websites, like when we go on vacation or something like that, and I'm trying to find a church. I have definitely gone to a church website and got a different impression of what the church was before attending the church. And, I can cite some very specific examples, and I don't think they were intentionally trying to be like something that they're not on their website like that. I don't think they were trying to look too hip or something like that, and then they weren't hip. It was just that it wasn't the same that I was expecting. So I think that we need to be true to ourselves online, because we want people, if people are looking for a church, we want them to have an accurate representation and know what to expect when they come in. But some of the things that Chris talked about in the interview was like low hanging fruit, like having a website is a good idea. Google presence. I don't think we have great Google presence, something that we can grow in, and online reviews. And I think I talk about this in this interview, but so we have a Yelp. Our church is on Yelp, and we have one Yelp review. So I'm going to read it for you because it's from years ago, but I love it. This one gentleman who's come to our church exactly one time wrote, "My wife and I live in Virginia and visit Stratton Mountain, which is the mountain near us, a few times a year. My schedule has often meant I was not here on a Sunday, and my wife has come to First Baptist several times by herself. Today was the first time I was able to go with her. I'm giving First Baptist 5 stars. If you were looking for a warm welcome, simple, heartfelt worship, and an encouraging biblical message, you will like what you find. If high-powered and flashy floats your boat, this won't be the place to look."
It's a very accurate, very good representation of what our church is. I guess if you're a pastor and you can write a good Yelp review on vacation, you should do it, because I think this is really honest and helpful for us. I have no idea how many people have seen that review, but it doesn't really. You will not. You'll be like, yep, that's pretty much what our church is like. So I really appreciated that, and I think it's funny, and So
I still love it. I still appreciate that he wrote that for us. So I think that we just have to be honest to who we are, and but there's little things that we can do to make our churches a little bit more known. And for our context, there's only 2 churches in our town, so I think it's easier to find us. But I'm sure that there's rural churches out there that there's more churches in your community, and so finding ways online to make your church a little bit more visible is a good thing.
Definitely. All right. Well, without further ado, here is our interview with Chris Morton.
We are back. Another episode of the Rural Renewal podcast.
All right, we're into day 2 here, and so if Kathleen and I look a little glazed, it's been amazing to talk to so many people.
It's been so great, but yeah, I'll sleep well tonight. Let's just say. So today we have Chris Morton here, and we're going to talk about all things social media, getting the word out about what we're doing in the rural context. So, Chris, tell us who you are, what you do, how you can help.
Yeah, so my name's Chris Morton, and I am Director of Strategic Initiatives for Fresh Expressions and Marketing. And you know what that means is that I just try to help people find out about what we're doing and how we help churches. And, along the way, I have just noticed some things that I think of as kind of like low-hanging fruit that I don't think are like require a marketing genius, but can just help any church, including rural churches, show up online. I think there's, you guys tell me if you think this is true or like a legitimate characterization, but I think there's kind of an assumption that rural churches are or rural communities are behind the times in general, and that can be reflected in the amount of energy and purpose that is given to websites and their email presence. I don't think that's actually true.
I was going to say, last I checked, everybody in our community, even though we may be a little behind, they all have a smartphone, last I checked. So, they know how to use it.
They don't just have a smartphone. Some of them have YouTube channels.
That's, well, some of us do.
Yes. So, and
WestRiverWeatherGuy.com.
Yeah.
What is it?
West River Weather Guy. It really only applies if you live in southern Vermont and you want to know what the weather is. But there you go.
But yeah. But that's and this is a general church problem, and so I don't want to necessarily paint this on rural churches, but I do think that it's maybe easy to, especially if you're in a scenario, you guys tell me if this is accurate as well, but you're in a space where you assume everyone is relationally connected, that people know where the church building is, maybe even know the name of the pastor in a rural church. Like, would you say that that's accurate, that there's probably an assumption in small towns that...
Yeah, I mean, people know about the church. I mean, in our town, we have 2 churches. So, and both, the other pastor of the other church has been serving her church longer than we've been serving our church. So we're pretty well integrated in the community. And what our churches do is pretty well integrated into the community.
Yeah. I think, though, that there's also a problem and a reality with assuming that because of that you've done the work you need to do, that people know who you are, what you're about, when you gather, what the vibe is. I think it's easy to assume all of those other things just because they know where the building is, and maybe you talk at the grocery store. The reality is, in 2024, when we're recording this, that a lot of people, even in small towns, have become accustomed to Googling instead of knocking on their neighbor's door when they have a question, even in a rural space where everyone's supposed to know everybody. So with all that in mind, I just thought I might share some things that I feel like are like super easy things any church can do that are really low-hanging fruit, that help with kind of on a digital way to just show up in the places where people are looking and asking questions. So the first thing is, and hopefully in 2024 everybody's there, but you should have a website. You should have a website. If you can, it should be the name of your church.com, or something close enough that people can figure it out. And so if you have that and you have the right name, there are tools that can help you get it right so it shows up in Google. So that's the first thing. You should have a website. And there's some obvious things that should be on there that I know are obvious, are obvious, but not all church websites have it. But if you're looking up a church website, what would you guess is the number one question that people probably have when they go to a church website?
Location and times of worship.
Yes. Have you ever had this experience where that is actually your question and you spend a significant period of time scrolling, clicking buttons, trying to answer really the only question?
Yes.
Yes. I was saying, well, I've been on vacation trying to find a church, and like, wait, when? And especially on vacation, I can guarantee you, this is going to speak to where my mindset on vacation quite often, but if that's not in the first 2 clicks, sorry, I'm going to move. And there's any other option, that's going to be the option.
Yeah. Okay. So this is hard if you are theologically or missiologically minded, because you want people to come to know us by our love and smell the aroma of Christ. And I want that for people. But I also want people to be able to Google us and find us and know when and where we meet. So I would say the first thing is to have a website. And the second thing is the first thing you see on the website should be probably when and where you meet. So that's the first thing. And you don't have to have a fancy website to do that. There are great tools that'll do that for cheap or free even. And you can figure that out on your own. The second thing is other places that people look for information about churches. And it might not be where you think. It's actually the same places they look for information about restaurants or about stores or basically anywhere you go with your body to do a thing. So making sure you show up on places like Yelp, that you have a Facebook page, and that you have a Google Maps profile so that when people show up. So the first thing you do when you look up a place that has a physical address on Google is that it hopefully shows up on the right-hand side of the screen with a map, with the name, the full address, and sometimes like times that it is open. Now, the church is the people. I firmly believe that the church is not an event that happens, but on Google, Google is going to ask you for times and location. And there are people who want to know about you and want to experience what your church does. So make sure you show up on Google would be one thing. But the other thing is that all of these, and this is might rub you a little the wrong way. It's kind of weird to think of a church in this manner. But the other thing is reviews. So can first thing is to be in the places and have accurate information there. So if you change your meeting time or you get a new space, please update your Google, please update your Yelp and your Facebook page. But the second thing is, can you get some reviews on there? You just have to ask and, ask the people that you trust to say something honest, but hopefully nice about their experience, because anybody can leave a Yelp review or anybody can leave a Google review, and again, it might feel kind of weird because you're used to using those resources to say oh, I really liked this restaurant's sandwiches. So to tell people go review our church, that does feel weird. But the fact is there are people who are eager to find a church and are going to Google you, and they're going to see one church's website has accurate information. The other church's website is really hard to figure out. One church has a Yelp profile, the other church doesn't. One church has a Yelp profile with 10 reviews, and the other church doesn't have any reviews. Well, which of those is going to get more attention? Just the fact that you have reviews. So the way that I help people think about this is if you've invested in signage, the purpose of the signage isn't to sell people on your church. It's to remind people that you exist when they drive by or walk by and when they gather. This is the online equivalent. And in 2024, that means, writing reviews. So, and I believe that you guys recently set something like that up. Is that what you were telling me, Kathleen?
Yeah. So I set up an account on Yelp for our church, and it doesn't have much information. We have exactly one review at this point. And it was actually very accurate, and it was from a guest. So I appreciated that.
Thank you.
Yes. I know who it was.
It was positive.
It was positive.
And positive and accurate,
yeah,
which is really what you're looking for.
He said if you were looking for a polished church, this is not for you.
Which is accurate and also kind of positive.
But then he went on to say
it was a really great
worship service and great community, that kind of thing. But it was accurate. Like that gave a flavor of what our church was about. And there's not a whole lot of churches within an hour or two drive of us that have a Yelp profile. So, I mean, has anybody shown up because of it? I'm not sure, but I don't think it hurts to have it.
And you don't know. And you also have to think of it as a really long game. Yeah. Especially, and this is where we can wax a little more missional. I think of a friend, a dear friend, who I have known for a decade, who only recently started attending our church. And after about a year of attending our church, this person told me that they had driven on a Sunday and sat in the parking lot a dozen times before they walked in the door. And there's a lot of layers to that. There's a lot of layers that person's going to have to sort out with themselves and with God. But they knew where we were and they knew how to find us. And so investing a little time and energy into these things is not something that you do to make sure that someone shows up on Sunday. It's something that you do, just like the sign out front, that when someone is looking, that they can find you. And we know this with physical things, but sometimes we forget about it with digital things, and that's just where people are looking today. Have you guys had any other experience with that kind of thing?
We certainly have had people come who and you can tell when they've been to our website, Kathleen, pretty early on when we got to our church 15 years ago. So, I mean, websites were not a new thing 15 years ago. But in rural church ministry, they weren't that old of a thing. I always say sometimes it was funny in the early 2000s with rural churches particularly. The internet was not around in 1950, but somehow we had websites that had been around since 1950. I don't know how that happened. We are really good at that. So, but Kathleen, I think, you got really interested in setting up a website for us that was pretty static, not entirely static, but pretty static, but accurately reflected where we were, when we met, and a little bit of who we were, which is, I think what we're trying to look for. And we have had people who have come to church, and I don't know if who had certainly looked at the website before. And actually pretty recently.
Yeah, there was a couple who checked us out, and
because they knew all sorts of stuff about us.
Yeah, they knew stuff that they weren't going to have found out unless they looked at our website, because they didn't know anybody in the community. They were new to the community. So they knew stuff. And so I'm like, I think that we were able to overcome some obstacles because they already knew. We already lowered some of those newness kind of anxieties because we already told them who we were before they came in the door.
That's really good. Tell me more about that, because I want to know what kind of things did you do other than just where you are and what you mean? What do you think lowered their anxiety?
I think one of the things, Kathleen, we're going to toot your horn here. Our website does a pretty good job reflecting the flavor of what Sunday looks like without kind of showing. I mean, you can find our YouTube videos of our service because we stream, but that show what's it kind of look like to be at church on a Sunday morning. What are the expectations or the lack of expectations in terms of what you're going to look like if you arrive and not feel out of place. What to wear. Yeah. Matter of fact, you've got a whole thing of if you come for the first time, here, and again, because one of the things people, especially now, if you've been to church a bunch, then maybe you have some sense of that. But if you haven't been to church before, who knows where your concepts are of what it's going to feel like. And we want you to feel like
these days it might come from horror movies.
Yeah, it very easily could.
All you know about is
And so I think doing that kind of lowers some of those anxieties of what to expect when you come. We try to have pictures. We actually were talking about this recently. We need to update our pictures.
Ooh, that's the hardest thing. Yeah, it's the best, but it is
because
the hardest.
I do a lot of the website stuff, but as pastors, pastor, I can't take a lot of pictures.
Yeah, that's one of the problems.
Because I'm talking to people, I'm interacting, so it's really hard to do that. So we talked about, okay, who can we get to take pictures that will take decent pictures? They don't have to be professional, but that, okay, it shows that, this probably we have about a quarter of the people who come to church on Sundays are under the age of 18. I think that's really helpful for families to know that they're not going to if they want a church that has a few kids, they'll know, oh, this church actually has kids at it. So that we'll be valued there.
Yep.
So I think there's some things like that can help people feel more comfortable coming in for the first time.
Yeah. Clarity is a gift, right?
Yes.
Clarity and knowing what to expect. I talk a lot about the gift of knowing where to go and what to do with your body, is so much of what we're trying to do here. You mentioned when you introduced me that we would talk about social media, and we haven't yet.
Oh, that's true.
It's
such an easy episode to record because you're asking your own questions.
So just hold on to that one.
Okay.
Because I think there's something actually more important that you should worry about before you worry about social media. Actually, Kathleen and I work pretty closely together. So do you have a guess on what it might be?
Before social media.
The most important thing. So, okay. So assume that somebody wants to find out more about your church.
Yeah.
They look at the website, they see where it is, when you meet, and then they show up. What do you think?
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say. You should have some sort of, you should get their contact information.
Yes. Yes. In your opinion, does that matter in a rural setting?
Oh, for sure. So when we first started when we first started at our church, I would get their mailing address and I would send them a note the first time that they would come and invite them for coffee or tea or whatever. So I would do that. As time has progressed, people are I don't know if they're not weirded out, but getting their address is harder, their mailing address.
Sure.
So a lot of times I'll do one of three things. I'll somehow get their email address. I will reach out to someone who knows them and get their I'll find out their phone number and I will text them. Sometimes I can get a number from them, but pretty early on, I'm saying, hey, let's get together. We'd love to have dinner together. We'd love to get coffee together. It depends on the situation and the people. And a lot of people really respond well to that. Yeah. And then we'll ask them if they show interest, they come for at least a couple of weeks. We'll ask them if they want us to add them to our MailChimp email list.
Okay.
And we do a weekly email.
Very simple.
Very simple. It's basically the announcements you put in the bulletin.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what you get.
So people know what's going on. Occasionally we'll send out an extra email during the week, but that's probably 4 times a year.
Yeah. Good for you.
And really good for you.
All of that is
I had no credit to me. It goes to me on this one.
The fact that you were sending postcards and inviting people to coffee was a lot more than I expected you might say. So the big idea there is to think about, and this is really hard for church people to think about, but it's really hard to visit a church. That's the first thing. It's really hard to visit a church. And I shared that story about that before. You know what's harder than that is to go back a second time. And so the question is then, what are the things that you can do to make that easier and to remain in touch? And by the way, the Rural Renewal podcast is part of the Fresh Expressions ministry and movement. And this applies whether you are a Sunday morning church or a dinner church or a super organic Fresh Expression that meets at a brewery at midnight on Tuesdays, whatever. You're
still going to be able to communicate with people.
Still need to be able to follow up. Maybe we'll edit this part out. I am so glad that I met my now wife right when eHarmony and some of those online dating things were starting to take off. And I'm so glad that we didn't like have to go through that maybe a couple of years later. Because I'm not sure I make the best first impression. But I do think that there's something to. We met at church, and I had this rule. This is so bad to say on a podcast. Whenever I saw a pretty girl come to church for the first time, I would try to get her to volunteer for something the next Sunday, because that was a way to make sure that they would see me again. We had a very, very complicated coffee bar where we did like multiple pour over coffees. It took like 6 to 8 people to run every single Sunday. And the person running it I knew was super burned out. And I'm standing in the coffee line and I hear this pretty girl talking to my then roommate about her job as a producer. And I turned around and said, "Would you like to produce this coffee bar?" And because she didn't know any better, she said yes. And then she was responsible for managing those 6 to 8 volunteers for the foreseeable future. And then we saw each other every Sunday. So the point of that story is that you want to create opportunities for continued interaction beyond that first website visit and beyond that first Sunday. So there are things you can set up on a website to capture someone's email or phone number right there, which that would be like a gold star in church world. I'm not sure a lot of churches do that or need to, but that would be pretty big. But definitely on Sunday. So and just like it could be, and this is really depending on the size of your church and your own like technical know-how. I'm a fan of an old-fashioned clipboard and a pen, and just be like, hey, if you write your email down, I will send you a note and we'll figure out a time to grab lunch. It could be that simple. But there are also tools that you can use that will set up like text messaging funnels that are automated. And, that used to be really weird. I'm not sure it's weird anymore. I mean, I get one from every restaurant I go to and anything I buy online. So maybe a church would want to do that too. But the point is, like, figure out a way to get some contact info so you can follow up with people and have a plan. What are you going to say to them as soon as you get it? What's the first thing you're going to say? And then what is like, a week or 2 weeks later? And then when are you going to stop if you haven't heard back from them or seen them?
Yeah, very important. Yeah. And I think one of the things, it is interesting, I think, first of all, that I would agree. I think it's less weird now to actually text somebody after a service than to send them a physical note. It's obviously somewhat context dependent. If someone comes through the line and they seem like the best way to get in touch with them would be through writing them a letter and sending it off, great. But a lot of times people are more they feel less uncomfortable with the text now than they do with.
I don't know, man. Like maybe I'm supposed to be the digital guy or whatever, but if I got a handwritten note in the mail, I would remember that. And I have a 4-year-old, and they walk down to the mailbox every day. And if they got a handwritten note,
that's true.
They would sleep with it.
Yeah. You are right about that, because when our kiddos get mail, they love it. So, and our kiddos are more than 4.
So yeah, don't give up on the handwritten notes. I mean, it's a lot of labor, but
yeah.
So that would be, if the first thing is like make sure you show up on the internet, and the second thing is make sure people can find out when and where you gather. The third thing would be make sure you have a plan to follow up with people. And then if you get all those things together, then like maybe you should do social media. But what do you guys do for social media?
So we've gone through sort of different phases of social media. We haven't focused on it as much.
Okay.
So probably like we try to do major posts for major like Christmas and Easter and what the plan is and that kind of thing. And then we'll post those to we have a town forum Facebook
Okay.
group, for better or worse.
Definitely both.
I don't post there very often as the church, but Christmas and Easter I post a ton. And so I will post like every other day for like a week or two before. And I just started doing that. It used to be like only one post and that was it. But I found last Christmas Eve, we got a lot of people we'd never seen before. And that's the only way that I can see, or that I could imagine that they would have found us.
Sure.
So,
Because it was people not really from and of course
community.
we were in a somewhat unique setting where for Christmas we have a lot of people in town who are only in town for that time.
Yeah.
So it's a little different than some churches. But.
So I think that's we put a lot of emphasis on that, and some major events during the year. I'll post. But we post on Facebook our stream. We stream our worship service, and so people can see that. But we don't have a ton on our website, or on our Facebook page. Besides that, and some of it is how much energy can I put into it, and recently I haven't put as much energy into that because I find connecting with people and trying to follow up is much more fruitful than social media posts.
Sure.
Another thing that's I would say adjacent to social media is, and I'm thinking there's probably other places that have things like this. So we have this thing called Front Porch Forum, and you can post on this forum, and then they'll send out emails to anybody who signed up about different things going on in the community. And so major events I will post on there as well. If you're looking for a church to worship.
I just think of that as like, there used, even in small rural places, there used to be like a weekly town newspaper or something.
Yeah.
And churches would have ads in that. And so this is sort of the same kind of
or like bulletin board. Like it feels like a bulletin board.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Like a virtual bulletin board kind of. Yeah.
I think what you're describing there is a little bit about what we talked about before, is showing up in the places where people are looking.
Yes.
Which is really different from trying to have a huge social media presence and hoping that you go viral.
Yeah.
So there's a few things to think about, like with that, like what you described is like, one of the things that Facebook does really well. There's a lot of things that are problematic about Facebook, but like hyper local and interest related groups are a thing. So good on you for like knowing how the other thing that you mentioned is like specifically focusing around Christmas and things like that. And I think what you're demonstrating there is just kind of a knowledge again of not only where people are looking, but when people are looking and what they're looking for, and making sure that your presence was there. Now, you said there are 2 churches in our town?
Yeah.
Maybe you got more visitors because you did that. Nothing that makes you better than the other church. You just put that effort into that space because you knew people were there. You knew people come around for the holidays in a vacation town. So yeah, what I want people to understand about social media accounts for churches is you should create the account. First and foremost, you should have a Facebook page, an Instagram account. And that doesn't mean you have to publish every day for the rest of your life. Just having those is actually part of what makes you show up correctly in Google. So having those and having accurate times and URLs and things like that on there is really important. And then the way that you describe using it for specific things. So I think there are 2 good ways that pastors specifically and churches and church leaders can use social media. One is just to for kind of like signs of life. So, figuring out, okay, how often can I post and what should I post? It's not necessarily, to drive a ton of traffic or whatever. It's just so when somebody looks at it, they're like, oh, that church still exists.
Yeah.
So like maybe that's once a week or once a month. Maybe it's a clip from your sermon if you're filming. Maybe it's a picture of something fun you guys did together. Maybe it's a graphic of a Bible verse. And just something like that. Maybe it's once a week, once a month, once a day, but it's based on capacity and your own interest. So that's the first thing. It's primarily just so people know you exist and are alive. But, the thing that's more important than what the church does, and not everybody's going to like this, there's something about some pastors really don't want to hear this, but is that they're more interested in you and you posting about yourself and what you're up to. And so I think there is value, again, within your level of interest and capacity for a church leader to just have a social media presence, for it to be authentic to who they are and what they're interested in, including the church. And that is because people are interested in people. We're we're humans. And whether that's in groups, our eyes go not to the room, but to the faces in the room. But on the internet, too, you're scrolling and you stop when you see a face, and you stop when you see something you're interested in. And people are going to find you on social media, and they're going to do a sniff test. And they're going to see, is this person like me? Is this person interesting? Is this person a jerk? Is this person posting things that are interesting, or are they posting things that are problematic? And then there's also a thing, again, this is a thing that no one wants to admit, but it's truth, is any church that has had significant leadership for a period of time will begin to reflect their leader. And that's just a natural thing. People are likes are attracted to likes. I think of a pastor of a church who I was at, I was there for a while. And about the time I got there, this pastor got into bicycling. And by the time they left, there was a significant number of cyclists who had become part of that church community. And that's just normal because of his relationships, but also because people are like, oh, I have something in common with this person. This is a place I can trust. I think our social media presence accomplishes the same thing. You're showing people who you are, what you're interested in. And so what you can do, functionally how this works is you have your own social media presence. The church has its own social media presence. And occasionally maybe you're sharing whatever was posted on the church's social media, or you are making an Instagram post from the event, or from Sunday, or from Christmas, or something like that. And again, if you don't want to do social media, that's also fine. There are other ways to connect with those people. But it is where people are looking. And so I would say you should probably have some sort of intentionality.
I think also the other thing is putting your energy in social media that's going to actually reach your community. So, for instance, in our community, Facebook is really where people get their information. Yes. People go on Instagram and other social media, but I would say if you're going to pick one in my community, Facebook is the way to go.
That is a really great point. So tell me how you figured that out.
I just know my community, and I'm on I see Facebook as my role as a pastor is it's a pastoral care kind of situation. So if I see someone who posts that they've had a terrible day, I won't necessarily comment, but I'll send them a text or a private message. I'm just reaching out to them. And I don't do that all the time, and I don't do it with everybody. But I think just knowing where...
Some of that reflects the age demographics in our community as well.
Sure.
While our church is not made up only of older people, I mean, the kind of young adults who tend to gravitate much more towards Instagram are mostly, there's a lot fewer of them in our community. And we do, and our community is made up of a lot more people, older Gen Xers or boomers who are more likely to be. Yeah, I know. Yeah. And quite frankly, that's okay because we don't know what to do. As we get older, it gets harder and harder. Right? I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, again, like you don't necessarily have to do this. And some people, I think wisely, are trying not to be in those digital spaces.
Right.
I would only say if you were opting out of that, what are you doing instead?
Yeah, for sure.
And that's also fun to figure out. Like, what, are you in the parks and in the bars and in, other spaces where you can interact with folks. So, let me see if I can recap real quick. We said, have a website, and then we said, make sure it shows up.
Yeah.
And we said, make sure it's accurate and says when and where you meet. Have a follow-up plan, including a digital email or text message follow-up plan, and have a social media approach that works for you. What would you guys add? What have you seen work or just not work, especially in rural spaces?
One thing I would maybe add as context to the reason why this is important, because it does, you're not wrong to say churches often feel a little icky around marketing for weird reasons. But if we believe in the church, and we should, that incarnational ministry, we're both certainly incarnational in the way Jesus was incarnational with us, but the way we are with others, right? It is our relationships with others in the church that are really the powerful force for evangelization, right? It's sure, we can tell a neighbor or tell somebody we don't know about who Jesus is, but they may even understand that and accept Christ. But if they're going to learn how to be a follower of Jesus, they're going to do it in relationship with other followers of Jesus. That's how we've all learned to be followers of Jesus. And that requires us to start those relationships. And if the way people are doing that is, well, we're not going to come visit, even if we think, oh, yeah, sure, you invited me even. But if they don't know where it is, or they feel weird, like, what's it really going to be like? And so they don't come, then they're not hearing about Jesus, and they're not, that relationship is not there. So it is it's a much more just, Jesus did this as well. He was telling people
he gave away food.
He gave away food. People showed up at the Sermon on the Mount. They somehow found out about that. Probably. And you know what? Give away food.
The other thing I was thinking about was you were talking about, like, as pastor posting on social media. And so, in your context, it's really important to know what people want to see. So in our context, people hear, Kathleen's a pastor. Is she really weird? Is she going to make me come to church next week?
Right.
And so, or like, is she just going to be awkward around me? So I'm pretty intentional about not just posting church things, about showing my whole life. Well, as much as, like, I'm not going to show all the bad stuff necessarily, but being honest of who I am. So for me, it's bread pictures.
I was going to say,
or
all bread
like
all the
that.
time. No, not quite. But.
Or like one day I posted, and it was kind of like on the fly. I said a few years ago, I sent something in the mail to someone in our community and said, you need to start from the beginning and work your way to the end. And I was like, can you guess what it was? Well, people really got into this and had all sorts, and it wasn't planned.
What was the thing?
It was a bread baking cookbook.
Okay.
I mean, what else would it be?
So someone that I was reaching out to, this family that we loved and really wanted to love Jesus.
Yeah.
He had gotten into baking, and I was like, he'd been looking at websites and just trying to piecemeal. And so I was like, he needs to learn the basics from this. So I got him a cookbook and I sent it to him because it was during COVID. So I just mailed it to him, and he's moved away, but he commented. He was like, we've given that cookbook to other people, and so those are the ways that we can, and people connected that way. And I don't have to talk about Jesus on every post.
No, you don't have to talk about Jesus on every post, and you don't also have to talk about bread on every post, or whatever. I don't have to talk about Batman and Star Wars on every, or my kids, or my bicycle on every post. I think, what we're talking about is showing up and being yourself in public. Whether that is face to face or online. I think, and you mentioned marketing. I think the ick that people feel is actually confusing marketing with advertising. Advertising is where you pay money to try to convince people to do a transaction. Marketing is the act of finding people you can help and making them a specific promise of how you can help. And so, what is the thing that your church can help with, and who are the people that you're called by God to do that for? And then once you know that or have a sense of it, then you start talking about that. And you talk about it face to face, but you talk about it on the internet and maybe on a flyer, maybe on your church sign, I don't know, maybe on a bulletin board, physical or digital. And you're just making a promise. This is a place this is a community where you're going to feel safe, or this is a community that smells good because we have freshly baked bread, or something like that, and people are like, oh, I'm hungry for bread. I like things that smell good. I can trust you. Things like that. So I don't think we have to be afraid of that word marketing. And I think understanding how we present ourselves in the world, physical or online, is really important. So, that's it.
Awesome. Well, this might be a stretch for some people to listen to in the rural church world.
Oh no!
But
give us some credit.
I think the low level fruit. I think trying to not try to do all the things, because we have limited resources, limited time. And what can we do that's going to have bigger impact?
And what would be the worst is if someone's saying, oh, we are just a rural church, so that doesn't matter. And that's just not true. Or saying we're just a rural church, so we can't do that. And that's not true.
Yeah.
You are
anyone could
a little piece of the kingdom of God. It is eternal, and you matter eternally in your little community. If it's little, if it's big, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
You matter, and yeah.
And also everything is on the internet that anyone can access anywhere. So it doesn't matter, Now, if you're in like rural West Virginia and you don't have Wi-Fi, and maybe that's a different conversation. But your neighbors are looking. Your neighbors are scrolling Facebook, whether they're in urban Chicago or rural Vermont.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, thank you, Chris Morton, for talking to us today, and we appreciate your time and your expertise.
I appreciate you guys.
Rural Renewal Podcast is brought to you by Fresh Expressions and the Ascent Movement. Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in places we eat, live, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. The mission of the Ascent Movement is to create a thriving, collaborative connection for the church to live out the Great Commission in today's context. One of the initiatives of the movement is the Mustard Seed Initiative. Inspired by the message in the parable of the mustard seed, the Mustard Seed Initiative seeks to empower small churches across North America, enabling them to grow in faith and impact within their communities.
To connect with this podcast, you can email us at podcasts@freshexpressions.com. Rural Renewal Podcast is hosted by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Blackie. It's edited by Joel Limbowen and produced by Kathleen Blackie and Jeanette Statz. Our senior director is Shannon Kaiser. A special thank you to Brad and Joni Perry of Alabaster Grace for the use of their music for our podcast.
If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media.
May God be merciful and bless us. May his face smile with favor on us. May your ways be known throughout the earth, your saving power among people everywhere. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Let the whole world sing for joy because you govern the nations with justice and guide the people of the whole world. May the nations praise you, O God. Yes, may all the nations praise you. Then the earth will yield its harvest, and God, our God, will richly bless us. Yes, God will bless us, and people all over the world will fear him. Psalm 67.